Shalom and welcome to another episode in our ongoing series called Faith Journeys with God in the Land. Today we go to the hill country of Ephraim, to a place called Sychar, where we'll talk about a woman that Jesus encounters at the well. This is the story of Jesus befriending the woman at the well at a place called Sychar. Now, the story is mentioned in John chapter 4, and my guess is you have heard perhaps a sermon or a teaching on this narrative, and I think it's a really important one to discuss today. First of all, let's get our map out, and we'll talk about where this took place. Now, Sychar, by the way, before we take a look at our map, is in the heart of the hill country of Samaria or Ephraim. We go there once in a while on trips, but generally speaking, we don't. In fact, when we do go to Sychar, all there is a church there. It's about 1.5 miles away from Tel Balata, which is biblical Shechem, which is mentioned in the Old Testament. But there's really nothing to see anymore at Sychar. A church is built over the well, and the well is rather deep. It's about 120 feet deep, and it still produces water. But where is Sychar on the map? Well, let me first of all point to Jerusalem. You can see that this main ridge that goes to the heart of the country is called the hill country. Here in the southern part, it's called the hill country of Judah. And then north of Jerusalem, all the way up to the south end of the Jezreel Valley, this area is called the hill country of Samaria or Ephraim. And Sychar is almost to the northern end of the hill country of Samaria. And it's about right here. Now, this map isn't that detailed, if you will, but it's generally in this area. And as I mentioned, the biblical city of Shechem is located there. And on both sides of this biblical city are the mountains called Mount Ebal and Gerizim. One was the mountain of curse and cursings, and the other was a mountain of blessings. So about 1.5 miles from Shechem is Sychar. Now, Sychar is where we pick up the story in John chapter 4, where Jesus is actually traveling through the hill country of Samaria. Maybe we should get our map out again, because most of the Jewish population, especially from the north and the lower Galilee and the Sea of Galilee basin, would not have either come down to Jerusalem through the hill country, nor would they have returned to the Galilee up through the hill country going back north. In fact, this is exactly what's happening here in John chapter 4. And Jesus is in an area where Jews typically didn't travel, and especially here in this area of the hill country where these biblical cities are located. So when we talk about John 4, it's a very tender, if you will, a passage where Jesus is actually at the well. We're going to learn a little more about this woman and her condition and why she was there at the well as we again glance at our book called Connecting the Dots, and we'll extract some teaching from here as well in this devotion. But this is a really significant moment for, I think, the disciples, because they're noticing what Jesus is doing for this Samaritan woman. Jesus would end up spending a couple extra days in Sychar, or this area near Shechem, before he would advance northward to the area of Capernaum, where he had his Sea of Galilee ministry base, if you will, located there on the western shoreline of the lake. But here in John 4, let's again read a little about this woman. And I'm drawing from a very insightful sharing from a gal named Susan Groh, Groh. And she is one who actually wrote something about, and I think it's quite accurate, about this woman. Because here Jesus encounters the woman at noon. Could it be that she was avoiding ridicule because of the shame of her life at this point? But Susan Groh, who participated in one of my trips, wrote these keen cultural insights about this woman. She wrote this: "She was poor, a woman in a male-dominated society, despised because she was a Samaritan, perhaps barren, with no value or worth, therefore divorced too many times and shunned because she was living with a man who was content to use her, but give her no dignity through marriage. She was forced to draw water in the middle of the day to avoid being embarrassed by other women of dignity or worth. Or she might have chosen that time of day to avoid the stares, the looks of disdain and shame. Perhaps the town folk communicated in very clear ways that her kind was not welcome in a cool of the early morning or evening when other respectable women would be drawing water for their families." I continue with these words in this chapter called Tasting the Living Water. "Through seemingly casual conversation and a normal request, Jesus revealed the truth to her, the truth of who she was and the truth of who he was. She intently listened to him. Regardless of racial heritage, Near Eastern hospitality required this woman to offer water. And given the Jewish ritual purity laws, would Jesus drink from an unclean Samaritan vessel? Risking becoming ritually unclean for a day was not Jesus' concern. He was more interested in offering her something, living water. Her thirst would be eternally quenched if she partook from the water Jesus offered. You see, Jesus was identifying as the Messiah who had much more to offer this woman. In fact, he would offer much more to even the Jewish community if and only they would actually perceive him as a spiritually oriented Messiah aimed to help people in their faith journey with God in the land. In fact, most Jews were actually anticipating a politically oriented Messiah, and that's not at all who Jesus came to be. I read again from the book. An ordinary day, doing an ordinary task, becomes a display of God's providential hand in her life, and then her impact upon others is equally remarkable. And now we pick up the rest of the story from John chapter 4. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him, that is Jesus, because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world." This was a transformational moment, not only for this woman at the well, disgraced by her past behavior, and yet now tenderly befriended by Jesus and his love and grace. The woman's understanding of the truth with which Jesus shared came to her progressively. This happened as Jesus was revealing himself to her step by step. First, Jesus referred to himself as the living water. He was the living water she needed. Next, the woman saw that Jesus was a prophet. He knew all about her, including her sinful past. Finally, the woman's eyes and heart were opened to enable her to see Jesus as the Messiah. He was the one who had come to seek and save the lost. Her heart was pricked, and she connected with Jesus, the very Son of God. Susan Grow continues and insightfully stated this: Jesus met her most basic needs for love and acceptance, value and worth. He gave her himself. He loved her by spending time with her and treating her as a woman of worth. He patiently taught and corrected her misunderstanding of truth. He included her in his plan by showing her a purpose worth living for, sharing the good news of the coming of Messiah. So for us, connecting in our faith journey with God happens when we realize how empty our lives would be without Jesus. Like this woman in Sychar, we can find ourselves chasing one temporary thing after another in pursuit of purpose, contentment, and inner peace. Yet real joy cannot be experienced unless we come face to face with Christ. Spiritual growth comes when we take the time to sit by the well and spend time with Jesus. Growth in our spiritual walk comes in proportion to how much we thirst after Jesus, our own personal living water. So, great passage from John 4. I hope that you can read it in its entirety from the beginning to the end. This woman is befriended by Jesus, not condemned, and yet this woman, her eyes and most importantly her heart is open now to seeing Jesus for who he was back 2,000 years ago, and still for us who he is still today, the living water. So we grow in our faith journey with God in the land as we proportionally thirst after the living water, and this, of course, is Jesus. So how thirsty are you today to seek Jesus? The cup of redemption is there that he offers us freely as we come to him in faith. And as we drink of him, our hearts, our lives become full, content, with purpose. So drink of the living water today in your faith journey. Don't neglect this water, because it's the only water that can really fulfill our purpose in life. So be encouraged by this story about this woman in John 4 as she encountered Jesus in a real way. And until next time, shalom.